So the media is playing a big role in this. You see it with Chicago. They think it's like going to be, I guess, troops coming in and just slaughtering innocent civilians. And you see it by the way they cover this case in North Carolina. It's a Republicans pounce. Why is this framed as Republicans pouncing?
Well, that's always the narrative. The way that it works is if a Republican does something wrong, the Republican doing something wrong is the story. If a white person does something wrong, the white person doing something wrong is the story. If a Democrat does something wrong, it's Republicans pouncing. It's the Republican response to the story that's somehow the story. It's a great way of avoiding the actual real problem here, which is, innocent people being murdered on trains because of horrible and feckless and gutless and terrible governance.
Right.
If you pay attention, you'll notice some arguments don't get questioned. They just get repeated. Go ahead and like, subscribe, and share, because on this channel, we slow things down and really look at what's being said. And you already know, our viewers can spot when something doesn't add up. Because listen to this carefully. There are arguments that get repeated so often, they start to sound like facts. No pushback, no real scrutiny, just accepted. But every once in a while, someone actually stops and starts asking simple, direct questions about it. And the moment that happens, everything shifts. Because when you slow it down and really examine what's being said, it doesn't hit the same way anymore. And that right there, that discomfort, that's usually where the real conversation begins.
In America.
And we should all agree, riding a train shouldn't be a death sentence. Daily Wire co-founder Ben Shapiro joins me now. So Ben, why do you think the media deep sixes a story like this?
Unfortunately, Jesse, I think it's perfectly obvious why the media deep sixes this particular story. And the answer is perfectly obvious when you look at the races of the people involved. If this had been a black victim and a white perpetrator, then it would have led the news nightly for months on end. You would have had riots in the streets. If it's the reverse situation, the media will completely ignore it because it doesn't match up with their preferred narrative of a white supremacist country that is cracking down on black people, even though statistically speaking, obviously, the vast majority of crime is intra-racial, meaning white on white or black on black. Black on white crime on a per capita basis is significantly higher than white on black crime. That does not match up with the media narrative about white supremacy in the United States.
It's my understanding that white privilege is not telling individuals that they cannot speak, but it is a term for societal privilege that individuals have as a benefit of their white skin. And I don't think that, and I think universities would be remiss to then say that because you're white, you're not allowed to say anything that's critical of white people. I didn't know that white privilege actually went into that sphere. My understanding is it's just, and the issue is that white privilege makes people uncomfortable to talk about the societal privilege that they have.
Well, to me, what I say on campuses all the time is if you want to cite instances of racism that we can all find and fight together, that's something that I am more than willing to stand next to you and fight, because that's obviously stuff that we should fight together. But when you just say that there is a white privilege out there in the ether and that by dint of birth your skin color generates for you an advantage, what you're really saying to people is that your view is less valuable because you have not experienced what I've experienced. And that is an identity argument, that's a character argument, that's not a rational political argument that can actually be taken on in any way. It's more of a cudgel and a club than it is an attempt to open a discussion.
You also feel like they're sensitive to being called racist by their friends, family, and colleagues for highlighting black crime?
There's no question about that. In the echo chamber that the legacy media live in, if you even mention black on white crime, then you are immediately seen as racially discriminatory in some way, because the basic idea on the left is that white against black is really the story of America, as opposed to blacks committing crimes against white people. To even mention that is to undermine the entire narrative of the 1619 Project, for example.
By re-releasing these people out into society after 11, 12, 14 prior arrests, isn't there something about self-preservation? The judges and the DAs alone, why would they do that? Why would they turn these people loose over and over again?
It's ideologically horrific. I have a book called Lions and Scavengers about the mentality that suggests that if somebody is acting badly, they must be a victim. And that is the mentality that undergirds all of this. When you hear the mayor say that you can't incarcerate your way to safety, that is precisely wrong. You absolutely 100% can incarcerate your way to safety. We do not have an under-incarceration problem in America. We have an under-incarceration problem. We need these people locked up for longer periods of time. This particular person should have been involuntarily committed for mental illness. He had violent schizophrenia, or he should have been in prison for armed robbery, which he had been convicted of in the past and done, I believe, 5 years in prison already for.
So we had a big crackdown on crime in the 90s. Clinton and Gingrich kind of took control, and crime rates did go down significantly. There was some blowback over the last couple campaigns because a lot of that was crack versus cocaine. They thought it was racial. But let's take the drugs out of it. Just on violent crime, should America go back to those types of tough sentences?
Absolutely. There used to be a man named Joe Biden, and back when he was a senator in the 1990s, he was very much in favor of actually imprisoning criminals. And then when he ran for president, he decided that he'd been wrong all along. Well, actually, Joe Biden, before he was brain dead, was actually right. He was right back in the 1990s, and Americans found that out when New York turned from one of the least safe cities in America to one of the most safe cities in America, specifically because of harsh crime policies in the city of New York and all over the country.
So the resistance you're seeing from these politicians, especially Chicago, because they're the worst, is this about not wanting to be exposed as feckless? Because they have just not been able to reduce crime significantly during their time in office. If Trump comes in and is effective, doesn't that just blow their whole case up?
It doesn't just blow up their case and their case against President Trump. It blows up their entire worldview. Their entire worldview is that crime happens for deep white supremacist systemic reasons. And if it turns out that crime happens because you're not doing the most basic thing, arresting and imprisoning people who commit the crimes, then their entire worldview is just wrong. And it turns out that personal responsibility and putting bad people in jail is the best way to keep your citizenry safe.
So the media is playing a big role in this. You see it with Chicago. They think it's like going to be, I guess, troops coming in and just slaughtering innocent civilians. And you see it by the way they cover this case in North Carolina. It's a Republicans pounce. Why is this framed as Republicans pouncing?
Well, that's always the narrative. The way that it works is if a Republican does something wrong, the Republican doing something wrong is the story. If a white person does something wrong, the white person doing something wrong is the story. If a Democrat does something wrong, it's Republicans pouncing. It's the Republican response to the story that somehow the story. It's a great way of avoiding the actual real problem here, which is, innocent people being murdered on trains because of horrible and feckless and gutless and terrible governance.
Right.
The key moment hits when Shapiro zeroes in on the core claim about systemic racism, this idea that society today is fundamentally structured to oppress. He doesn't just disagree casually, he goes straight at it. He argues that reducing everything to race ignores individual responsibility and oversimplifies complex issues. And the way he frames it is what grabs attention. He turns the argument into a question of logic. If everything is systemic, then where does personal agency fit in? That's where the tension builds, because on the other side, the Congresswoman is leaning into a perspective that says these systems are real, embedded, and still shaping outcomes. But Shapiro isn't entertaining that premise. He's rejecting it outright. And you can tell this is where the clash becomes bigger than just one exchange. It turns into a broader critique of how Democrats approach policy, especially when it comes to identity politics. He's essentially saying this isn't about solving problems anymore, it's about framing everything through race, whether it fits or not. Now, whether you agree or not, the delivery is what drives the moment. He's fast, he's direct, and he doesn't leave much room for the argument to breathe. That's why the video frames it as him destroying the position, because in terms of debate style, he dominates the pace. But at the same time, it's important to see what's actually happening here. This is a fundamental disagreement in worldview. One side sees systemic forces as the root problem. The other sees that explanation itself as the problem. And neither side is backing down. That exchange says a lot more about the bigger political divide than just one debate. Like, subscribe, and follow for more breakdowns like this.